Today we're going to answer the age-old question of what is ATF up to now. The good news is that the courts are finally starting to put ATF in their place. Today we're going to be talking about forced reset triggers. Hello everyone, my name is attorney Rachel Moss, and today we're going to dive into all the updates about forced reset triggers, also known as FRTs. Over the past few years, you've probably been hearing a lot about FRTs, what ATF has been up to, what the courts have been up to, and we're going to break it all down for you today. Last year, you might have caught attorney Mark Victor's video about FRTs, and we're going to do an update about what has happened since that point. But first, we're going to start out by talking about what even is a forced reset trigger. If you clicked on this video, you may have an idea what an FRT is, but I'm going to break it down just in case. So forced reset trigger is an assembly that allows the trigger of a semi-automatic rifle to reset quicker than it otherwise would with a standard trigger return spring. So basically what an FRT does, it allows you to shoot faster than you otherwise would with just a standard trigger. So when forced reset triggers started coming out, a lot of people were interested in purchasing them. There were a few big brands that were really pushing out FRTs. One of the ones you might recognize is Rare Breed. After a while, ATF started to notice what was going on with forced reset triggers, and ATF, like they often do with things that are kind of fun, didn't like it. And ATF issued an open letter back in March 2022 titled an open letter to FFLs. In this letter, ATF basically informed individuals that they interpreted FRTs as being machine guns. Many competent gun owners will immediately be suspicious to this sort of interpretation by ATF. Many gun owners know that an FRT is not a machine gun. However, I'll read directly from the letter what ATF said. They said FRTs are machine guns because these are devices that allow a firearm to automatically expel more than one shot with a single continuous pull of the trigger. So to kind of dive into this, we need to look at what federal law says. So again, I'll read out a definition to you about what federal law says a machine gun is. It's any weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger. So the law says that this can also be a part that can be added to a gun that can turn it into a gun that functions like a machine gun. So machine guns can technically be the machine gun itself, but it also can be a part, like an FRT. FRTs and machine guns were then regulated under the National Firearm Act, which is a piece of legislation that does what it says, regulates firearms. So machine guns can be possessed by military and law enforcement. However, other than these select groups going through proper protocols, machine guns are banned under the NFA. And violations of the NFA, specifically for possessing machine guns, can be very severe, up to 10 years in prison, can also result in $10,000 fines and forfeiture of any weapons that you might have possessed. So what happened next? The ATF didn't stop with their open letter. They started again doing what they often love to do, bothering the general public. ATF started sending out notices to people saying, you can't possess FRTs, it's time to voluntarily surrender them. And of course, voluntarily surrender basically means we're going to threaten you with prison and fines if you do not agree to surrender your FRT. So after that happened, a lot of people were concerned, turned to the internet, turned to lawyers looking for advice on how to handle the FRT issue. And I remember when this was happening because as a lawyer, it was difficult to know, is this something that's going to continue to escalate? Are courts going to rubber stamp this, say this is okay? Or are we going to have some justices really look at the law and realize that FRTs cannot be considered machine guns and that ATF drastically overstepped their reach? I was in a position back then where I had to tell people that came to me, I'm willing to fight for you and fight for your right to have an FRT, but if surrendering is the best choice for you and that's what you really want to do, I can give you the advice on how to do that in the safest way. And people had to make that decision for themselves. But many people were scared about what to do. But eventually a few individuals and organizations banded together and decided to sue the ATF for these issues. So there were two major lawsuits that really caught the public eye, one in New York and one in Texas. So we're going to dive in to the Texas lawsuit first. So the Texas suit was heard by the U.S. District Court in the Northern District of Texas. And recently, in July of 2024, this court granted a motion for summary judgment. So a motion for summary judgment in a civil suit is basically where a judge makes a decision before going to a trial. Basically, it's the moving party is asking the court to make a determination based on the evidence at this stage, rather than needing to proceed to trial for a decision. So in this judge's decision in granting this motion for summary judgment, the judge explained that it is first necessary to understand what an FRT is compared to a standard trigger. And today we've already discussed a little bit about what an FRT is compared to a standard trigger. But one of the important things that this court noted, and I'll read again, a lot of reading today, I'll read directly from this court's opinion. So the judge noted, when firing multiple shots using an FRT, the trigger must still reset after each round is fired. It must separately function to release the hammer by moving far enough to the rear in order to fire the next round. Well, the judge then goes through some of the history that led to this case. We've gone over it a little bit ourselves, but there are a few other things you need to know. Back in 2018, the ATF again did one of their classic moves, expanding definitions even though they're not a legislative body. And they expanded the definition of a machine gun way back in 2018. Back then, ATF was really going after bump stocks. So the Supreme Court eventually overturned ATF's overreach regarding bump stocks. ATF expanded the definition of a machine gun, and I'll read that out to you as well. They said a machine gun is also a device that allows a semi-automatic firearm to shoot more than one shot with a single pull of the trigger by harnessing the recoil energy of the semi-automatic firearm to which it is affixed so that the trigger resets and fires without additional physical manipulation of the trigger by the shooter. The ATF then decided to apply this revised definition, the revised definition that they made specifically for bump stocks, to forced reset triggers. So then the plaintiffs in this case gathered together to make this lawsuit. So the plaintiffs comprised of a few individuals who had received these notices in the mail from ATF and then later surrendered their triggers, as well as firearm groups like the National Association for Gun Rights, a great organization, and they banded together to fight the ATF in this case. In 2023, a temporary restraining order was issued in this case in favor of just the individual plaintiffs. So not everyone, just the individual plaintiffs, finding that the defense was unlikely to succeed in this case. And they found that ATF's definition was more likely than not to be found unlawful by the end of this case. They're not saying for sure it's going to be found unlawful, but they're basically predicting what their decision is going to be by making this temporary restraining order. In October of 2023, they granted a preliminary injunction. Summary judgment can be granted in a case if the moving party shows that there is no genuine dispute as to a material fact and that moving party is entitled to judgment as a matter of law. So to get summary judgment, it's not a super low standard. They have to show that the facts and the law are on their side here. And there's a genuine issue of material fact when a jury can possibly find for the other party. So when a court is able to grant summary judgment like this, they are saying that a jury could not possibly find for the other party. So here they're saying it is pretty clear that both the facts and the evidence and the law is all on the moving party side. In this case, the plaintiffs being the National Association for Gun Rights, as well as the other individual plaintiffs that were part of this lawsuit. When coming to this decision, the court here highly referenced the United States Supreme Court decision regarding bump stocks. If you don't know much about that decision, you can go into a deep dive on that in a previous 2A Roundup video, which I'm sure we're going to be able to link in the description below. So if you want to see that review of the bump stock decision, Brittany and I go into depth in that in a previous video. In that case, though, just as a quick summary, the Supreme Court found that a single function of the trigger means what it says, a single function of the trigger. So it does not mean a single pull of the trigger by an individual. So here they're saying, here we need to be focusing on the trigger, not the individual pulling the trigger. because that is what the law says. FRTs do not fire multiple rounds with a single function of a trigger. With each round, the trigger moves forward into a reset state and is depressed to release the hammer from the rear surface. A function of a trigger in general is to release the hammer. So the court found, knowing that is what a function of a trigger is, an FRT cannot be a machine gun. If a shooter pulls a trigger here, an FRT will only fire one round. Again, more evidence that it is not a machine gun. Again, the court also found that ATF exceeded their authority here. So not only was the law not on ATF's side when looking at previous Supreme Court decisions, but they also found ATF exceeded their authority here. And the court came up with a few remedies to put ATF in their place. The first one being that they found that ATF's classification of FRTs as machine guns is unlawful. So they vacated that definition. But they also put into place a permanent injunction. So previously in this case, there was a preliminary injunction, a temporary injunction. Now there is a permanent injunction enjoining the ATF from action. And there are certain things ATF is no longer able to do based on this injunction. This includes prosecuting people for possessing FRTs. This also includes ATF taking civil action, so they covered people both criminally and civilly against ATF action. ATF cannot send out those nasty little notice letters anymore. They can't request people to voluntarily surrender these items anymore. They also cannot destroy FRTs that have already been surrendered. It's important to note that this injunction was not nationwide. It only affected this district. However, when this court vacated the unlawful definition of machine guns perpetrated by ATF, that essentially functions like a nationwide injunction would. So even though the permanent injunction itself is not a nationwide decision, the vacating the definition is. So it has a really positive impact on the nation overall in stopping ATF from enforcing their weird force reset trigger interpretation. However, it doesn't end there. Of course, what does someone do when they lose a lawsuit? They appeal. So this case has now gone up to the Fifth Circuit, and it was recently heard by these Fifth Circuit judges. The Fifth Circuit is basically a step between the district courts, where this lawsuit was heard previously, and the Supreme Court of the United States. So we're in that middle stage right now. And the Fifth Circuit has not made a decision yet. This was really recently heard. It could take a while for a decision to come out. However, we can kind of guess what could happen, but we can't know for sure. It seems like the judges were indicating that they were going to take the plaintiff's side here again and agree with the lower court that ATF's definition was unlawful. The Justice Department argued in this oral argument that the lower court incorrectly applied the law and misapplied Garland versus Cargill. That was that Supreme Court case regarding bump stocks, saying that that decision was really specific to bump stocks, not forced reset triggers. In response, one judge said, "It seems to me you're trying to get us not to focus on the trigger, and it's all about that in this case." And the judge said, obviously, that's part of the statute. So when you hear judges saying things like that, you're kind of clued in to what side the judge might rule on. However, like I said, we can never know for sure until the decision comes out. So we're going to keep an eye on this decision, and I'm sure we'll update you once that decision comes out as well. And of course, just like what happened here, we got an appeal. If either side loses in front of the Fifth Circuit, they can choose to appeal this up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And I think there's a good reason that that could happen. I earlier mentioned that there was a New York lawsuit going as well, and the New York lawsuit was going a little bit of an opposite direction. In New York, they actually enjoined a FRT manufacturer, Rare Breed, from continuing to manufacture and sell forced reset triggers. And if you go on Rare Breed's website, you'll see that they took down all of their postings about the triggers and posted that they're not able to sell right now. However, they have also appealed to the Second Circuit very recently. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the Second Circuit yet, but we could see potentially the Second Circuit either agreeing with that injunction and continuing to prevent Rare Breed from selling FRTs, or we could see this overturned. If the Second Circuit sticks with the lower court's decision here, we could have what's called a circuit split, where different circuits have different opinions on the same issue, one being pro-FRT, one being against. And if that happens, that is the perfect time for something to be appealed and considered by the Supreme Court. Because anytime there's circuit splits where different circuits disagree, there's a bigger interest then for the Supreme Court to resolve that dispute. Where if all the circuits were in agreement about what was going on, it's less likely that the Supreme Court would need to jump in and provide any clarity because everyone already agrees. So here we have to watch and see what happens. If we're going to have a Fifth Circuit appeal here, a Second Circuit appeal here. But basically, I think what we can expect in the future is more litigation on this issue. So the good news is ATF has been put in their place. They have been found to overstep their boundaries, so it's good that the courts are checking them. But we don't know exactly what's going to happen next. There's still more to come on this in the future. So you know we are going to keep you updated every step of the way. Thank you again for tuning in today to discuss forced reset triggers. If you want to learn a little bit more about us, see some of our other videos, you can check us out on this YouTube channel. You can also learn more about us on attorneysforfreedom.com. That is our law firm. You can also check us out on attorneysonretainer.us. Attorneys on Retainer is a self-defense protection program that allows you to get legal protection in the event of a self-defense incident. So go ahead and check us out there as well. And also, while you're here, you might as well like, comment, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.